Hey, good afternoon to you. 306 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, joins us. We'll talk about what is changing in Washington, D.C. Are the people getting more power? The answer may be yes. We'll talk to Kevin about that. Some optimistic news ahead. Pat Fallon, the congressman from Texas, will be with us at 4:30 in the midst of an impeachment push for Alejandro Mayorkas. CNN says that's racist. And then Julie Kelly is going to join us today at 5 o'clock to react to news today out of a D.C. appeals court that Donald Trump is not entitled to presidential immunity. She'll have some takes on that. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yeah, so it's amazing what's happening right now in Washington, D.C. That gigantic Ukraine funding package that also included a little bit of funding for Israel and a little bit of funding to bring more illegals into our country, a big amnesty package. It is dying. In fact, it is dead. In the United States Senate, it's not even going to get to the House for the dead on arrival promise that Speaker Mike Johnson has made. It's not making it out of the Senate as of this afternoon. And the reason for that is because even the senators who supported it in the first place, the Republican senators who supported it, are now backing away from it. And that includes Mitch McConnell, who over the last 24 hours has waved the white flag of surrender to the people of the United States who did not want to see an amnesty package jammed through the Congress. And they were sick of this. They didn't like this whole idea that we'd be amnestying a ton of people into the country, that we'd say that it was normal to have up to 5,000 people per day flowing across our borders. And they didn't want to be a part of a talking point that the White House is rapidly trying to convince everyone to get behind, that the border crisis is actually Trump's fault. It's not Biden's fault, it's Trump's fault. And you had Republicans who were playing along with that, to include people like Mitt Romney, remember, who said about a week ago that, oh, Trump is trying to kill this bill because he wants to keep the border crisis going as an election talking point, which is, of course, the opposite of the truth. The opposite of the truth. Trump wants a secure border. It's been his entire purpose as a presidential candidate, then subsequently a president, and now once again a presidential candidate. Get control of the border. This bill does not do that. It makes permanent the out-of-control nature of our border. So Mitch McConnell's backing away. Here's Politico's report on this. So yesterday you heard us. We played some audio of him. It was like a lullaby. It would put you to sleep. So we actually played lullaby music underneath it as he was speaking, and it sounded fitting. Almost immediately after he got off the floor yesterday, he goes to a closed-door meeting last night with Republican senators, and Politico reports the following. McConnell told Republicans that if they didn't like the direction that the bill is going, they should vote against it moving forward this week. Now it's time to vote against it. John Barrasso, who's in leadership, he's from Wyoming, he's the number 3 Republican leader, this morning announced he is opposing the bill now. Quote, I cannot vote for this bill. Americans will turn to the upcoming election to end the border crisis. So now you have Republican leadership turning against this. The thing is dying. I saw today that Lankford, who was the Republican who was involved in negotiating this with Chris Murphy and Kyrsten Sinema, who calls herself an independent now, Lankford said not only has he been run over by the bus, but the bus backed over him. So I guess he couldn't see that bus coming, but now he's felt it. He should have never been a part of this to begin with. And yet here we are. Mitch McConnell was asked about all of this today. Of course, the media is trying to jump all over the White House's framing. Oh, it's Trump's fault. Trump is trying to stop the border from being brought under control. Here's CNN talking to Mitch McConnell today.
The president came out and he pointedly put the blame on Donald Trump. He said Donald Trump is to blame for the failure of this bill. Was Trump's opposition too much for you to overcome?
Hey, it really is amazing. I'll play Biden's audio in a moment, but the idea is my failure is actually Trump's failure. So whatever you see that you don't like about me, it's actually Trump's fault.
Well, I've said repeatedly every month I'm not going to get into comments about the race for the presidency among Republicans. I think in the end, even though the product.
What is he
was
talking
approved
about? The Nikki Haley thing is not happening, so stop holding out hope.
by the Border Council that endorsed President Trump. Most of our members feel that we're not going to be able to make a law here. And if we're not going to be able to make a law, they're reluctant to go forward. There are other parts of this supplemental that are extremely important as well. Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. We still, in my view, ought to tackle the rest of it because it's important.
So the options are either use those things as leverage to actually secure our border or pass clean bills and force people to do an up and down vote. Clean bill. The only reason at this moment you would lump any of that together with a so-called border package is to actually secure the border. That's the only reason you would use those elements as leverage. And if you can't, put them all up and down for a clean vote. That's it. Biden doesn't want to send any aid to Israel, by the way. He was asked about this yesterday. He said, no, he would veto. The White House actually released a statement. They said they would veto an Israel bill if it was just clean funding for Israel. No, they're not going to do it. Why? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. There's a reason. The political reason why is because Biden's left wing hates Israel. They hate it. So the last thing they want to see the guy that they're supposed to be voting for in November do is send Israel a clean aid package. That's the truth. That's why Biden would veto it. Biden's hope is that it gets lumped together with a bunch of other things so that way he can slip it past his left-wing flank and suggest to them that, I had to take the good with the bad. You know, a little Israel funding had to be a part of this. Sorry, guys. But a clean bill makes it a little harder to squirm out from the anti-Israel sentiment that dominates his party. So that's what's happening there. McConnell says, we've got all these priorities we've got to address. Well, then address them.
Not that the border isn't important, but we can't get an outcome. So that's where I think we ought to head. It's up to senators.
Have you noticed McConnell always subordinates the border to Ukraine, though? McConnell, whenever, in all of his conversations, he says, in fact, it was last year, he said the most important issue facing the United States is Russia and Ukraine. No, not at all. The most important issue is the integrity of our country, our sovereignty, our economy, the well-being of the American people, the hundreds of thousands of Americans who are dying. That is the most important thing.
To decide how to repackage this if, in fact, we don't go on to it.
All right, so let me go to Biden now, the other octogenarian who's involved in this. Here is Biden today saying that this bill, which again is really mostly a Ukraine spending package, is fantastic, and that Donald Trump stopped it and it's Donald Trump's fault that the border's wide open. But now Biden in the White House now openly calling the border a crisis after saying for 3 years it was a challenge. Remember the Jen Psaki semantics debates? It's not a crisis, it's a challenge. Mayorkas would say, oh, it's a challenge, it's a challenge. And then he would insist that DHS's operational control of the border is secure, it's secure. They would say over and over. Now they're saying it's a full-blown crisis and it's Trump's fault.
For much too long, as you all know, the immigration system has been broken.
Oh.
And it's long past time to fix it. That's why months ago I instructed my team to begin negotiations with a bipartisan group of senators to seriously and finally fix our immigration system.
That's back when he said that the border was only a challenge.
For months now, that's what they've done. Working around the clock through the holidays, over the weekends. It's been an extraordinary effort by Senators Langford, Murphy, and Sinema. The result of all this hard work
has been an abomination.
Bipartisan agreement that represents the most fair, humane,
unfair, inhumane
in our immigration system.
Increases child trafficking.
In a long time. And the toughest set of reforms to secure the border ever.
Weak, a shell game that imports foreign nationals through other means.
Now, all indications are this bill won't even move forward to the Senate floor.
God bless America.
Why? A simple reason. Donald Trump.
No, the American people. That's the reason. Donald Trump. So again, he wants to pass off the blame here because this is one of, if not his biggest political liability. It's the border crisis. Americans in surveys are demonstrating number one concern right now is that the border's wide open, illegal immigrants are pouring across it. So Biden, rather than fix it, tries to shift blame for that. It's a classic left-wing pattern, and it's happening here. It's happening here. What are the 3 steps for Biden's reelection campaign? 4 if you include explicit meddling in ballots and things like that. But the primary steps are gaslight the American public about the economy, gaslight the American public about the state of our border, and convict Trump. That's the Biden re-election campaign strategy. That's the whole thing. And so this is the immigration part where he says, oh, it's actually Trump's fault that the border's collapsing. Now, to his point, the point that he tried to make, which is, it's Trump's fault. No, it's actually all due credit to the American people and the great conservative journalists who covered this story as it was developing in the first place. People like Henry Rogers at the Daily Caller, who shared the details of this bill before we saw it. And then when it came out, guess what happened? He was right. He was right about the status of the bill, what it did, the shell games it played, the allowance for at least 5,000 illegals to come across the border each day. And and the work permits, all the asylum being granted, it was all there. So the bill comes out and Americans aggressively consume the text of it. We were given it on Sunday. Everybody read it. This is not normal. Normally, Americans, legislation in Washington, it's been kind of ignored. It comes and goes. It's given a weird name, something that makes it sound like it's really great for you. The Patriot Act. In the end, it gets used against you. And so Americans are sick of that game, so they decided to read the thing. It's okay. Let's find out what's in it. And they were all waiting. They were waiting. We thought it was going to come out Friday. We all waited. It didn't come out Friday. It didn't come out Saturday. It comes out Sunday. Everybody sets to reading this thing, breaking it down, exposing every wart in the damn package. And by yesterday evening, it was dead in the water. Sunday night release, Monday night death. That's how fast the American people responded. And that is a great story. That is a great story this week. It's unfortunate that it takes this much sunlight. But boy, if it's going to require it, we're going to pour it on. I saw today, I retweeted someone. Oh, yeah, this guy, I don't know who it is. He's a reporter. I think he writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Anyway, he tweets the following. Not long ago, if you had Mitch McConnell, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and the Chamber of Commerce all endorsing a deal negotiated by a conservative Oklahoma senator, it would be a slam dunk with Republican senators. Those folks aren't running the show anymore, says this reporter. Now, he does this as a criticism. You should see all the left-wingers in his comments who are all saying how, oh my gosh, America's lost because Congress isn't letting the Chamber of Commerce write legislation anymore. Do these people hear themselves? The very same lefties who a decade ago would have been slamming Congress for allowing the Chamber of Commerce to write legislation are now saying they don't recognize the country without the Chamber of Commerce writing the legislation, without the Wall Street Journal editorial board giving a full-throated endorsement to a piece of legislation pushed by a Republican senator, without Mitch McConnell's steady hand. They don't recognize this country. To which I say, hilarious. Hilarious. And power to the people. It's great. You don't want the Chamber of Commerce writing every piece of legislation. Do they get some stuff right? Yeah, occasionally. But they shouldn't be in charge of this any more than the Wall Street Journal editorial board should, or certainly Mitch McConnell should. And so Americans paying attention killed this thing. And so Biden is trying to say, oh, this is so bad for our border. Our border's in crisis because this legislation didn't get passed, he says, which is gaslighting.
This bill would also give me, as president, the emergency authority.
He already has it. Whatever else he's about to say, he's already got the authority to secure the border.
To temporarily shut down the border when it becomes overwhelmed. The numbers are talking over 5,000 people trying to get in one day. The bill, if the bill were law today, it would qualify to be shut down right now while we repair it.
And so the deception here, which does not get called out by the corporate press, is that Biden already has these powers. In fact, he has the obligation to secure our border, and he's refusing to do it. In fact, he's ordering the Border Patrol to cut open the barriers that Texas is erecting to stop the invasion. And invasion, which is, of course, my word, is also Al Sharpton's word this week. Did you hear Al Sharpton? I played the audio yesterday. Al Sharpton on MSNBC says to Senator Chris Murphy, we got an invasion, he said, going on the border. And he's using that phrase now because he's trying to advance Biden's talking point. There's an invasion going on, and therefore, ipso facto, Trump's fault. Orange man bad. What? Trump's not president. As you dutifully attempt to remind us with each passing day. He's not president. The former guy's not president. The left is crazy. Okay, so then how is it his fault that Joe Biden opened the border. Shut up, bigot. That's the whole debate, to the extent that you can call it that.
Hey, Vince, thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I wanted to just point out, I think you missed a key component when you were talking about the Democrats' plan for winning the election and the presidency, and that's abortion. I think it's a little bit of a sleight of hand almost, where we are focused on immigration, and I think a lot of Democrats are also worried about immigration, but the ones that I talk to in the D.C. area and around the country are saying all of that doesn't matter. Abortion's what's most important, and we're kind of in denial about that. So I think our talking points need to, we need to have an ad campaign like they had. That's why we lost the primaries this last time, was just basically on abortion.
Yeah, well, it's true. The Democrat platform is abort Americans, amnesty illegals. That's the kind of the whole thing. But when it comes to that issue and how it ranks, I've been talking about a Harvard-Harris survey that came out recently, and it found that 35% of respondents nationwide said that immigration is their number one issue. Inflation is number two at 32%. Beyond that, healthcare is where you might find this concern about abortion. That's number, I think it's 5 on the list, 16% of respondents. So there is a narrow group of Americans who do rank that number one. You're right about that, Macy. But it's dwindling in the face of all of the chaos we're facing. But again, to remind people, the Democrat platform, abort Americans, amnesty illegals. And boy, we're seeing a lot of both of those things, quite unfortunately. Coming up, Kevin Roberts from the Heritage Foundation joining us next. We'll talk to him about the backlash to Washington's latest scheme and the success the American people are having. Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Congressman Pat Fallon joins us about today's ongoing impeachment hearing of Alejandro Mayorkas. And then Julie Kelly joins us at 5 o'clock today to react to a big decision coming out of a D.C. appeals court, whether or not Donald Trump is entitled to immunity for his official acts as president of the United States. The update's there ahead, and you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL.
Most of our members feel that we're not going to be able to make a law here. And if we're not going to be able to make a law, they're reluctant to go forward.
Yeah, so it sounds like this gigantic Ukraine package with a little bit of border meddling is dead. Mitch McConnell waving the white flag of surrender today, and GOP leadership increasingly coming out against it. For more on this, I want to bring in Kevin Roberts now. He's the president of the Heritage Foundation, host of the excellent Kevin Roberts Show. Kevin, great to talk to you, sir.
Vince, always my pleasure. Thank you.
First and foremost, it's the first time I think we've talked since you got back from Davos. Thank you for the tongue lashing you gave to the globalists while you were there. I appreciate that.
Well, I'm really glad that I succeeded in substance, because I was afraid that if I failed to do that, you would never have me on your show again.
We were watching closely, and the thing that really bugged me was that they gave you so little time. They tried to like squeeze you out entirely. They gave you this little section on a panel with like 50 people on it, but you used the, 5-6 minutes you had very effectively to scorch them. So again, thank you for that.
My pleasure to speak on behalf of your audience and forgotten people around the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so let's talk more about the forgotten people, because my sense this week, and you tell me if I'm wrong, this gigantic spending package, well over $100 billion, that the Senate didn't release the text of until Sunday night, it died by last night within 24 hours because of the forgotten people who recoiled at what they were seeing. Do you agree?
You are at the center of the bullseye, my friend. There are two aspects of this that are really important. The first is that, as you framed it, this is a gigantic Ukraine spending bill with a little bit of border non-security added in, and the American people were wise to it. And I'm so grateful for the forgotten people and their associates, including my friends and colleagues at the Heritage Foundation, for elevating that. But the second thing is, and this I think ought to give us hopefulness for the future events, This is one of the few times in recent memory that the average American has been able to successfully stop the D.C. establishment in its tracks because we're wise to their game. And when you hear the dejection in Leader McConnell's voice, nothing against him personally. I wish him a long and healthy retirement. But the American people have had enough, and they're ready to have their country back. So this is what we need to do. We need to remember our success in stopping this bill for now and apply that to a host of other policy issues. If we do that in the next year or two, then I'm really hopeful that this country will start to turn the corner.
During his remarks today to the American people, Biden seemed to indicate that he can't understand why Republicans wouldn't support this because the Wall Street Journal editorial board, the Chamber of Commerce, and Mitch McConnell were all behind it. So you have to be crazy to be against it.
Yeah, and I guess I'm even crazier because when I saw Karl Rove's mug on my TV on Fox News yesterday afternoon with his whiteboard extolling all the virtues of this border security bill, I thought, oh my gosh, these folks are really desperate. They're so out of touch. The president is so out of touch. Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Karl Rove are so out of touch. They think that if the Wall Street Journal writes an op-ed, which is just not based in the facts of the bill, they accuse us of not reading the bill when, in fact, we haven't analyzed it, that somehow we're just going to bend the knee to the regime. I'm so excited because you've heard me say many times, we're in the middle of the Second American Revolution. We're taking back the institutions of this country. This is the rebelliousness we need to have in this country toward these self-appointed elites who tell us that reality is one thing, but we happen to know that it's something else. So
let's talk about the substance of this legislation, which thankfully, as of this moment, appears to be dead. But I do think it's meaningful to rebut the claims that it somehow is going to enhance border security. Where do you see the biggest problems with the legislation as it was written?
Look, there are a host of problems, but I'll home in on a couple. The first is the most common sense way to understand this, and this is just objective policy analysis from the bill text. The big problem is that the bill says, in essence, we are going to put into law what the current situation is. And the current situation is that we had 6,800 people that we know of cross the border illegally yesterday, and 6,700 the day before. The bill literally does nothing to fix that, but instead takes that number, 6,700 or whatever the average is over a period of time, and says this is going to be the number of people allowed in for the duration of this emergency measure that the President of the United States has determined. And that leads me to the second mechanical problem with this bill, which is that it gives the president the authority to determine whether there's a border emergency or not. Why do you want to give that authority to this president? He's initiated this problem. So there are a host of other problems that people could read about at theheritage.org. But this is the real issue. And just on its merits or lack thereof, this thing isn't worth the paper it's printed on.
So, Kevin Roberts, have you seen evidence that Joe Biden would ignore a border crisis should one arrive?
Yeah, I've seen 10 million of them, including several thousand here in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so in other words, yeah, it's not going to get better. And that's the other piece is Biden already has not only the constitutional obligation, but also the legal authority to shut down the border. I mean, it's already right there in the law. So the game of pretend that Washington is playing today is that some new powers need to be given to the presidency in order to do something that he already has the power to achieve.
Well, that's right. And so if we step into the world of strategy, and I'm not talking about partisan politics here, Vince, but just strategy, what the Republicans in the Senate needed to do if they really cared about this issue, obviously many Republicans in the Senate do, but I don't think the leadership does enough, is take H.R. 2, the wonderful border security bill from the House that's been sitting and languishing in the Senate, and tell Chuck Schumer and the President of the United States, we're not talking about anything until you put this on the Senate calendar. That's what we've been saying at Heritage for months. And the response from Republican senators, Vince, from Republican senators has been, well, we can't get the votes for that. If what has happened in the last 36 hours where this bill has gone from alive to dead in that period of time because the American people have spoken doesn't tell you that there is popular will for the arrangement that I just mentioned, people aren't paying attention. And so God bless Speaker Mike Johnson for resetting it along those lines. You can count on us here at Heritage for continuing to push that, because we believe that's actually the policy answer.
Now, I don't know about you, but as a general matter, I always think that that Congress should vote on every issue as much as they can as a standalone issue. That, like, if it's going to be about funding to Ukraine, vote on that. If it's funding for Israel, vote on that. If it's about securing the border, vote on that. But to the extent that these things merge together, they have to be for the benefit of the American people. So if the idea is that you have some leverage in terms of sending some more money to Ukraine, okay, fine. But pass H.R. 2. Make that the requirement. Get H.R. 2 through, send a little bit of money to Ukraine, create a special inspector general explicitly for Ukraine, and say that's the deal, take it or leave it. But Republicans, they start in the Democrats' end zone and they stay there.
They do. And you know, to use the metaphor from cards, we've got this, the Republicans have this strong hand that they continually just give away to their political opponent rather than play it out. And I think what you just said is so wise about having standalone bills. In fact, I've encouraged the Speaker and the Republican senators who will listen to us to not just say we're going to insist on standalone bills, but put the agenda out there and go in chronological order and say we're going to take up border security, then we're going to take up the question of Ukraine, then we're going to take up the question of Taiwan, then we're going to take up the question of Israel, and have a good old-fashioned, honest debate with an up or down vote on each of those. I actually think it would be something that would transcend partisan politics, and the American people might actually have a little bit of trust restored in the process. But you see, that's transparent, Vince, and what the swamp hates the most, what the K Street lobbyists hate the most, is sunlight. And so we can't have anything that shines sunshine on the process.
Well, I thought the last 72 hours or so, really 48 hours, have been a perfect case study in what you just said, which is that there was an immense amount of attention. Congress, I don't think, wanted this. Immense amount of attention on the actual legislation in the lead up to its release. They kept telling us, how dare you criticize it? You haven't even seen the text. We kept responding, show us the damn text. It finally comes out Sunday. It's as bad as we expected. There were a couple of great conservatives and journalists who all put the work together, the Heritage Foundation, media outlets, everybody digging in, and sure enough, this thing was as bad as we expected. It comes out, and it's the American people who stop it in its tracks. But it's going to take that sort of collective effort, group effort, to stop Washington's aggression.
It absolutely will, and it's such a team effort. I know that sounds trite, but I really mean it. It takes radio hosts, including you, other people on WMAL. It takes organizations like Heritage, but more importantly than us, people outside Washington, D.C. We had a coalition call this morning with organization representatives from around the country, and I told them this thing would still be alive were it not for you. You see, that's the solution to concentrated power in Washington, D.C. It's the same solution it's always been, which is for the people to have a voice, but to your point, to coordinate it at just the right time to be able to actually exercise a rifle shot on a really terrible piece of legislation.
I want to go back to the single issue bill idea that we were just discussing, which is, yesterday there was some talk about putting forward an Israel aid package, for instance, in the bigger spending bill that they just presented and is now dead. It was something like $14 billion they wanted to send off to Israel. The idea was put forward yesterday, like, well, why don't we just do a standalone package? Why don't we do just an Israel bill and let Congress take an up or down vote? Biden has already declared he would veto that bill. Why would Biden veto an Israel aid bill?
Because he's the same president who we understand from Washington rumors in the last week has told senior staff that he supports a recognized Palestinian state. This man is at best, Vince, wrong-headed on Israel. The fact that he's trying to slow down the Israelis in their rooting out of Hamas terrorists tells you everything you need to know. But also, it's a presidential election year, and even if Biden on one of his better days might be a bit of an Israeli defender, ultimately the politics of his party don't allow him to be. And so this is to sort of conclude this point with a little bit of optimism. This is why so many Jewish Americans who have very routinely voted for Democrats, I happen to know this firsthand because a lot of them call me, they're leaving the radical left in droves. There is a massive realignment underway in this country, including them and many others. Unfortunately, it may come at the cost of Americans sending some additional aid to our Israeli allies. Yeah. But the long-term political consequences, I think, can be very beneficial if we can actually seize the moment.
I know that your realm is policy, but you are attuned to the politics of all of this, and I wonder if how interested or how effective you think the White House is going to be. Their current effort is to try and blame Donald Trump and his supporters for the current state of affairs. They went 3 years calling what was happening on our border a challenge. They now say it's a crisis in their official statements. They say it's Trump's fault. At the same time, they say the economy is actually great. The American people have no idea what they're talking about, and that MAGAnomics is what is actually going to destroy us. This is people are poorer than they were when Biden took office. And also, Joe Biden's Justice Department is in the midst of trying to convict Joe Biden's political opponent. And the politics of that, pretty obvious. So you have voters who say that if Trump is convicted, they'd be less likely to vote for him. Now, what do you make of this? This seems as dangerous as a time for government overreach as we've ever seen.
Yeah, it really is. And on the first of those 2 points, the first one involving the Biden administration, that's the rhetoric of a very desperate, discouraged group of people. And if you look at polls by any outlet, it shows that the lack of faith, the lack of confidence that the White House suffers is going to persist. In fact, it seems to be deepening. And so they're not going to be able, I think, to convince the American people either on national security or economics that the alternative somehow is worse. But speaking of the alternative, President Trump, look, these legal troubles are real. I happen to think all of the charges are illegitimate and politicized, but they're real. I mean, if there's a conviction, it could affect the election. The thing that I'm hopeful about, the thing that I'm prayerful about, and this is just a comment about society, it's not a partisan one, is that this episode that we've gone through over the last few days on this border security bill, plus just the dishonesty from the White House, will convince those people who say they won't vote for President Trump if he's convicted that, in fact, there's something more afoot. And, maybe there are people in the center politically, and they wouldn't necessarily vote for the president.
Yeah.
Obviously, I can't endorse him. I'm not endorsing him here, but I'm just saying at a higher level, Americans need to see through the politicizing of everything that happens by this White House. And if we do that, I think that there will be very good political consequences.
Yeah, you begin to see a lot more clearly when you realize you're being played. And I hope more people realize that. Kevin Roberts, thank you very much over at the Heritage Foundation. Always good to talk to you, sir.
Thanks, Vince. Keep up the good work.
God bless. Thank you very much. All right, let's go to the phones. I've got Seamus calling in from Woodbridge, line 2. Seamus, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Hey, Vince, how are you?
I'm good. Seamus, what's on your mind?
Well, first, I just want to say I love your show, and I'm sure your dad's real proud of you. I'm a former Marine, so you do a great job.
And you're okay with that phrase, former Marine? I know it's always one of contention. There's no such thing as a former Marine, they say.
Well, I say that because I was active duty as opposed to reserves or,
Okay, I respect it.
But, yeah, I think the gentleman you just had on, Vince, was a little bit too optimistic just because we've got one little good vote on Monday about this bill. Mm-hmm. Where were these guys when we gave $130 billion to Ukraine, who doesn't deserve a penny of my tax dollars?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In other words, have there been fights? Have there been fights we have lost? Definitely, a lot of them.
A lot of these Republicans went along with it, Vince.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not saying he's one of them, but, we've got to get our act together as a party because we are so far off the mark, it's not even funny. This country's in serious floundering trouble. And if we don't get it together very soon, we're gonna go over the precipice into nowhere land.
I agree with you. I mean, that's why it's so important we fight like hell right now, to your point. And to Kevin's defense, Kevin Roberts is the president of the Heritage Foundation. He recently became president, and I think Heritage is a lot better off for having him. He's very much a realist. He's not. There's no rose-colored glasses on that guy. He's a happy warrior for sure, but he's got I think a very realistic perspective on the state of the country, which is why it's useful to have somebody like him in there fighting. But I agree with you. It's going to take a lot of these concerted efforts. We need a lot more victories before we start saying that we're tired of winning. That's not the position we're in right now. Although, it would be great if we were.
We need to find a way to protect Trump. I mean, this legal thing, it's not even legal. It's political. So
it's insane. It's totally third world. Seamus, thank
Keep
you.
up the good work.
for the call, for your service. And your realistic perspective. I genuinely appreciate it. Hey, coming up, we've got Pat Fallon, the congressman, will join us today. An effort to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas is underway. CNN says it's racist. How is it racist? I will try to explain it, I guess, coming up.